Welcome in once again to the Waiver Wire podcast on a Monday morning here at 4 for 4 Fantasy Football. I am Matt Okada. It is the Week 8 waiver show, which means we are very close to the halfway point. In fact, one might call this the halfway point of the fantasy football season. We've learned some things. We have been confused about some things. There's some things I still don't think we know, like is Mark Andrews a tight end for the Baltimore Ravens or not? They play the Buccaneers tonight, so hopefully we find out a little something there. Some new things we learned yesterday. Russell Wilson, turns out he's kind of a good quarterback still. At least certainly seemed that way against a very good defense. And the Steelers offense scored the most points they've scored all year. That seems kind of relevant. And Devontae Adams didn't entirely fix the Jets, at least not yet. Although it could be the case that they start to move that way. You did start to see the ramifications of him being there, like Garrett Wilson being a little more open. He just needs to catch the ball a little bit better. All right. Let's get into the top 5 waiver ads of the week. Before we do that, remember, if you have questions, drop them in the YouTube or the Twitter chats. If you're here live. If you're not here live and you're listening to this podcast, thanks for listening. Glad to be in your ears. But if you ever have free time on a Monday morning at 9 a.m. Pacific time, technically noon Eastern, so it's not even morning over there, on your lunch break perhaps, hop in here. The YouTube link is on 4for4 Fantasy Football YouTube channel, and I usually tweet it out. And you can ask questions, and I will answer them, and we will get great information downloaded for the coming weeks and the playoff push. All right, let's start with number 1. You're going to recognize this name. Woo, English is hard. This is a name that has probably been in the waiver wire top 5 more than any other this season, now overtaking Bucky Irving and Tank Bigsby, who are looking like starting running backs potentially. Bucky Irving obviously maybe in a little bit more of a 3-person timeshare, a hot hand situation, but arguably one of the better options in that trio. And Tank Bigsby, especially after this past week, is getting a lot of buzz as, is he just the better fantasy running back and running back in general in Jacksonville? Doug Peterson not willing to commit to that. But the point of that bit of information is those guys were in the waiver wire column for weeks, back when they weren't this hot. Now they are. This is why we get them in advance. So back to Braylon Allen, the number 1 waiver priority on the week. And I will be honest with you guys, this is largely, if not primarily, because this is not a great week for waiver wire ads, particularly at the top. There's some guys scattered throughout who could be pretty curious league winners. There's some intriguing ads that we want to stash away in case something happens, but largely there's no like 10, 15+% of your fab budget or number 1 priority overall type of guy. Though I do think Braylon Allen is close to that on the number 1 waiver priority side of things. Here's the thing with Braylon Allen, and I've said it before, but I'll remind you guys. If something happens to Breece Hall, and that is crucial for Braylon Allen, I don't think he's going to take the job without that happening, which obviously somewhat occurred with Tank Bigsby, although even there, Travis Etienne has battled injury a little bit. But if something happens to Breece Hall, Braylon Allen is not only an RB1 rest of season, a fantasy RB1, but has the upside to be like top 5, top 6, because Breece Hall can be that. We saw it last night. And that's with Braylon Allen around. If it's Braylon Allen and some third stringer, and based on what we've seen from Braylon Allen this year, I think he will be an absolutely elite fantasy running back. So if you play in super shallow leagues or you have no bench spots, you don't need to add Braylon Allen. You need to have guys that you can flex in on your bye weeks. I get that. But if you're in a normal league, a league like most of us play in with 10, 12, 14 teams, 6, 7 bench spots, you should have room to stash away Braylon Allen. If you've got some unimportant QB2 behind your Josh Allen, Drop that QB2. You don't need them. You can stream someone the 1 week that your elite starting quarterback misses. If you've got some low upside wide receiver 4 that's clogging up your bench and you're never going to start them, or you could stream someone off of waivers the 1 week that your starters are on bye, I'd rather do that, get rid of those guys, and add Braylon Allen, because if something happens to Breece Hall, the waiver cost of adding Braylon Allen the week after that happens is going to be astronomical. It's going to be nearly impossible for you to pull off unless you've been hoarding your fab or are in the number 1 slot, literally. So if you've got a waiver spot or a bench spot, spend your waiver priority on Braylon Allen. Get him tucked away. I said in the article, I am just holding him until further notice, maybe the entire season. That's the way we play fantasy football sometimes. If it gets around to the playoffs, maybe we start playing, defend against the other team's defense type games. But for now, stash away Braylon Allen. Number 2 is right now, as we speak, Tyler Lockett. Briefly I will pull up the comment from Cavo Richard in chat because it was on Braylon Allen and I want to get to it before we get on to Tyler Lockett. Cavo Richard said, Allen cannot catch like Hall, similar to Mason and CMC. Not the same class, and they will not throw the ball the same to the RB. This is true, Cavo Richard. He can't catch the ball like Breece Hall because very few people can except CMC. But to your point about Jordan Mason and CMC, I ask you this. How good has Jordan Mason been with CMC out? The answer is a top 5 fantasy running back. So 49ers offense, arguably a little bit better, maybe, although it's been a little iffy as of late with the injuries. This is my point. Braylon Allen can be Jordan Mason at least, and I think he's a better pass catcher than Jordan Mason is, although Jordan Mason's also not terrible. So he can be a very, very elite fantasy running back. All right, let's get to Tyler Lockett. This hinges entirely on the injury that DK Metcalf suffered on Sunday. He came down weirdly on his knee at one point, got checked out, did not return to the game. Ian Rappaport has reported that the Seahawks do not think the injury is considered major. There's general optimism that he'll be okay. If that's the case, we're not adding Tyler Lockett, but I don't know if we'll know about Metcalf until after waivers run. So I'd rather tuck away Tyler Lockett. Worth noting, he's rostered in 57% of Yahoo leagues, so he may not be available for you. But if he is, he's largely been dropped because he has not had very much upside this year. He's been very consistent, a very consistent like wide receiver 4, getting, 5 catches, 50 yards type situation a game, but not really scoring enough to matter. If DK Metcalf is out, those numbers get massively inflated. Tyler Lockett becomes the 1A or 1B alongside Jackson Smith and Jigba for that team and is pushing for 8, 9, 10 targets, 70, 80 yards maybe. Much better chance at a touchdown because obviously DK Metcalf does a lot of the scoring there. He becomes extremely valuable. I think he jumps into high-end wide receiver 3 territory with wide receiver 2 upside and good matchups. This might be a 1 or 2 week stream. It might be a nothing if DK Metcalf is fine. Or if DK Metcalf, it turns out the optimism is misplaced and he misses significant time, then this could be a really, really valuable pickup. So if you have a bench spot to tuck him away, do it. Wait to hear it on the DK Metcalf news, and then we'll react accordingly. Jay Lizard in chat says, Tyler Lockett is the best route runner in the entire NFL, has great chemistry with Geno. I don't know if I'd say he's the best route runner in the entire NFL. There's some pretty good guys out there, but he is one of the craftiest wide receivers in the league. Does have good chemistry with Geno, which he also always had with Russell Wilson, and is effective. Like if you look at his numbers, he's been very effective this year. He just doesn't get the target share to be a wide receiver 1 or the touchdown upside. But with Metcalf out, both those things could change. Waiver priority number 3 is Jalen Tolbert, a name that I am placing this high in priority because he was on bye this past week. And I don't want everybody to forget that prior to the bye, we were excited about adding Jalen Tolbert. And coming out of the bye, I'm excited about adding Jalen Tolbert. Brandon Cooks still on injured reserve. These past few games, 2 games, that Cooks has been on injured reserves, Tolbert has run the most routes on the team. That's right, even above CeeDee Lamb in total. They're very, very similar, but up there running every route alongside CeeDee Lamb. He is clearly entrenched as a wide receiver 2. Since week 3, he's caught 17 of 23 targets for 196 yards and a pair of touchdowns. He has been very, very good in that role behind CeeDee Lamb. For fantasy, that doesn't always mean great, but keep in mind, Jalen Tolbert hasn't had a lot of time in this role. He can only really continue to get better. He is, I think, very much a flex play in decent or better matchups, and he has the Cowboys and him, fortunately for Dak Prescott in this offense, have a ton of those matchups coming forward or coming ahead. Weeks 9 through 12, they get the Falcons, Eagles, Texans, and Commanders, all of whom are green matchups for fantasy wideouts. So if DK Metcalf is fine and Tyler Lockett's not the high priority ad that he currently is, Jalen Tolbert, I think, becomes the number one ad. He's only rostered in 20% of Yahoo leagues, so he's much more available as well. I would drop 5% of my fab on him pretty easily. And if you're in need at wide receiver, if you're struggling to find a flex play due to injury or whatever, I think Tolbert's worth maybe more than that, and is a guy I'd be okay putting in my flex all the time. Number 4 is Drake May. We do not have quarterbacks up here in the top 5 super often, but Drake May has played some dang good fantasy football, and honestly, some pretty good football in general. First 2 NFL starts with these past 2 games, he is averaging 260 passing yards, 2.5 passing touchdowns per game, 28 rushing yards per game, and 1 interception per game. That is 21.2 fantasy points in most scoring formats, which would make him a high-end quarterback 1. There is a chance that he only gets better than this because, for heaven's sakes, he's only played 2 games. Doesn't necessarily have the chemistry with all his wideouts or pass catchers, although that has looked pretty good. It's worth noting his last game came against the Jaguars. That's going to inflate anyone's fantasy numbers. And 4 of his next 5 starts come against tough opponents, including the Jets, the Bears, and the Dolphins, which are all super tough, all top 5 in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position. So if you think you're picking up Drake May to roll him out immediately as a high-end quarterback 1, I might temper your expectations there. But if you're picking up Drake May because, A, you're kind of hurting at quarterback and need to stream someone with upside, I think Drake May absolutely has it. He has rushing ability to add on to what has been very good passing ability. And if you are in a 2 QB league, he's a must start. And if you just want a backup to a more fringe guy like a Jared Goff, Sam Darnold, who we're a little bit less sure about, Drake May is an absolute perfect guy to slot in for that kind of role. He, again, in these matchups against these top matchups, I would probably rather start quite a few other streamers because he's a rookie in a tough matchup, but he has shown enough to be added in fantasy. And when the matchups aren't that hard, I think he will be a quarterback 1 on a weekly basis. So throw him in if you've got a spot for a quarterback, either backup or 2 QB league or you're streaming, and enjoy the lucrative results. Tyler Sperry, I see your chats, by the way. We will get to the Q&As that don't pertain to what we're talking about here once the top 5 are over. So I will get to your questions. No worries. Number 6 is pretty much a package deal. Or sorry, number 5 is pretty much a package deal with Demario Douglas. Or with Demario Douglas. With Drake May. Listen, guys, it's early in the morning after a 12-hour Sunday. Demario Douglas is a package with Drake May here because I think he is the wide receiver 1 for Drake May, and I think he is going to be a great fantasy wide receiver over the next few weeks or really over the rest of the season as Drake May and him continue to build chemistry. Now, you say to me, Matt, he didn't do anything in week 7 in the London game against the Jaguars, who are the best opponent to play in fantasy for wide receivers. And to you, I say, true, but he was apparently extremely sick, throwing up that morning, unable to stand for portions of the game. Really, really rough illness problem, apparently. So we're going to throw that game out. We're going to ignore it. Outside of that, he has been highly targeted by Drake May. 9+ targets in 3 of the last 5 weeks as well. He was coming on even before May took over. I think Demario Douglas, much like Drake May, is just actually good at football, and it's starting to show up with a better quarterback, a better upside for the offense, and Demario getting healthy. He was injured early on in the year. He's got talent. I think he has a lot of upside. 42% rostered, so he's another one where he may not be available. But if he is, and if you need wide receiver help, he's really solid ad, I think. Could have the highest floor of anybody we've mentioned so far, and does have upside, especially in PPR leagues, if he is truly the wide receiver 1 for Drake May, which I think is the case. All right. We also will throw in a waiver priority number 6, just because we included Tyler Lockett early on, and if DK Metcalf is fine, then Tyler Lockett is basically thrown out the window. In that case, Alexander Mattison would become your number 5 ad, and this is a top 5 show, so I thought I'd include him. Again, rostered in over half of leagues, but might be available, and the cutoff for this column and this show is 60%. He's rostered in 54%. And once again, this week is kind of tough for waivers, so a lot of the ones we're adding are the guys who are added in many leagues, but just simply aren't as rostered as they should be. Alexander Mattison should be rostered in every league. He has been unfortunately good. I don't think we really want this. And anyone who drafted Zamir White definitely doesn't want this, but Zamir White hurt, was not playing well anyways. Alexander Mattison has had 17+ touches in 3 straight games. He's had more than 80 scrimmage yards per game in those games, and a good smattering of catches as well if you play in PPR formats. This offense is basically running through Brock Bowers and Alexander Mattison. So you're rolling him out there, honestly, as an RB2 in a lot of games, as a flex in a lot of other ones. Most leagues, most teams, I think, would start Alexander Mattison in most matchups. So he should absolutely be rostered, and he should be played pretty often. We'll see if anything changes when Zamir White returns, but it's not like you're dropping 20% of your fab on Alexander Mattison only to have Zamir White come back and ruin your life. You're putting in pennies to get him, and if he remains the number 1 running back for the rest of the season for the Raiders, it will be a very valuable fantasy pickup, in my opinion. All right. That is the top 5/6. Braylon Allen, Tyler Lockett, if DK Metcalf is going to miss time, Jalen Tolbert, Drake May, and Demario Douglas, the New England Patriots package, and Alexander Mattison if you need a flexible running back. Okay, let's get to Q&A. There's a bunch of questions here and a bunch of comments. And we will tackle these questions and any others that get added into chat before the end of this show. So continue to throw those in. We'll start off with Tyler Sperry and the super chat. Thank you, Tyler. Thoughts on Jaden Reed, the crybaby, got more targets? I assume that this is largely intended to mean, will he get more targets by being squeaky wheel? Only 4 this past week against the Texans. Romeo Doubs dominated targets. He had 10. Jordan Love threw the ball 33 times. It wasn't a ton. I think Jaden Reed will have these games every now and then, Tyler. The issue with Green Bay in general is that they've got so many guys, and a lot of them are like a similar tier, which is these are pretty good NFL wide receivers. I don't feel bad about targeting them if I'm Jordan Love. I think something's good is going to happen if I throw them the ball. And so while for fantasy, we feel like Jaden Reed is the best guy, why doesn't he get 10 targets a game, Jordan Love? For NFL purposes, he plays a different role than Christian Watson. He plays a different role than Romeo Doubs. He plays a different role than Dontavian Wicks and Tucker Kraft. All of these guys are targetable from an NFL standpoint in different situations against different coverages, against different defenders. And Jordan Love is going to recognize that and throw it to who he thinks is the right play. And the offensive coordinator is going to scheme up plays to go to the right guys on a play to play and week to week basis. So for that reason, for all those reasons, Jayden Reed is going to disappear a little more often, I would say, than your typical wide receiver one for fantasy. Having said that, I do think he's the best receiver on this team, and I think that he has had enough very good games this year for us to believe that more often than not, he will be very valuable for fantasy, and he will be the most usable asset for the Packers. Also worth noting, he had a game with 6 targets. He had 78 yards. He had a game with 6 targets. He had 50 yards. He had a game at the start of the year when he had 6 targets for 138 yards and a touchdown. So he's not necessarily going to be a target hog. In fact, his highest total in the year is 8. He had 139 yards and a touchdown in that game. So we do want him to get to that 6 or higher threshold. But that's basically just where he's been living this entire year, is a 6 to 8 range. You're not going to get many 10 target performances for Jayden Reed. He's explosive enough that you don't necessarily need it. Tyler adds, sorry, crybaby equals Dobbs. Oh, yes, fair enough. Dobbs was the squeaky wheel. Did that thing where he skipped out on practice like an absolute crybaby. I fully get your point now. And came in this week and got 10 targets. So was that entirely because of his squeaky wheeling? Maybe not, but was it heavily related to it? Very possibly. If that is the case, and even if it's not, this is not going to happen on a weekly basis. Romeo Dobbs is not going to get 10 targets maybe ever again, but certainly not on a weekly basis. This could have been here's your 10 targets, Romeo. Stop crying. We have a lot of good players on this team. Give him his good game, and then go back to Jayden Reed being the number one, or at least getting 6 to 8 targets. So, good question, though. That is important to note with the Romeo Dobbs 10 target game, is that he was coming off that. I skip practice because I don't feel like I'm used enough. Yeah. Catch me outside, Romeo Dobbs. Okay. This wild girl dad life just briefly comments, not a question, but drafted Holland Allen from the get-go. Well done. And picked up Douglas off waivers last week to stash. Well done. Demario Douglas has been in the waiver column for a few weeks now. And this is just a reminder. If you are not reading the waiver wire column on a weekly basis, if you are not subscribed to 4for4.com, go to 4for4.com/plans, get the premium subscription, get access to my waiver column every week on Monday morning. It is published, and you will get these names before they are high waiver wire priorities very often. Barring it fluke injuries that bring somebody to the top of the list, almost every name that you see in the high priority or the top 5 in this podcast has been in that column in a previous week, because we're identifying these guys in advance and then they're continuing to break out. So go get access to that column, read it every week. Not at all biased by the fact that I spend several hours and 3,000 to 4,000 words writing it every week. Nathan Thompson 87 asks, is it crazy to drop Sam Laporta for TJ Hawkinson? Also have Tucker Kraft. Wow. Sam Laporta had 2 targets, 1 catch, 25 yards against the Vikings. This was a week after his only target was a fluke long touchdown on a trick play. He has been the most disappointing player, I think, at this point in fantasy football. The biggest bust, arguably, based on draft capital. He has been awful. This isn't like, a Devontae Adams play or a Marvin Harrison Jr. play where we drafted them at the fringe of round 1 and they've been either not that great or got injured, and so we don't like that very much. This has been Sam Laporta was drafted as a number 1 tight end in many leagues, or Travis Kelce and others, but number 2 in those leagues. We've had to start him every single week because he's Sam Laporta, and he has put up dud after dud after dud outside a few decent games. Can you drop him? I think the answer to that is no. will say I might rather have TJ Hawkinson rest of season, and I might rather have Tucker Kraft rest of season. But I really don't think you can drop Sam Laporta. You need to try to find a way to trade him. I know that's going to be hard because he's been awful. It would have been best to do it after that game where he had one catch for 52 yards and a touchdown, because that was his best game of the year. But he's still Sam Laporta. He might still carry that name. And there are probably still players in your league who don't have a reliable tight end either, and they'd rather have a reliable tight end named Sam Laporta than an unreliable tight end named Sam Laporta than an unreliable tight end named Hunter Henry. So go see if you can trade him, even if it's for pennies. If you can, I'm okay moving on at this point. It's been 7 weeks of this, and it is horrific. I do not trust him. I do not trust Jared Goff to target him the way they did last year. I do not trust the touchdowns to come the way they did last year, which was the main value he had. And I would honestly rather have TJ Hawkinson or Tucker Kraft rest of season. Worth noting, TJ Hawkinson obviously hasn't played a single game, but once he is back, which I think should be either next week or the week after, he figures to be, which it's worth noting is what we thought about Sam Laporta, a elite, one of the best tight ends in fantasy. The way this offense has been running, the way Sam Darnold has been playing, and the way that Minnesota could use a strong number 2 target behind Justin Jefferson. Obviously, Jordan Addison and Jalen Naylor are good, but I feel like TJ Hawkinson is a better number 2 the way he plays the game in terms of target count, at least. I think that Hawkinson will be very good. I also think that Tucker Kraft has just shown he is a better fantasy asset right now than Sam Laporta. So, long-winded way of saying, Nathan, I think you should not drop Sam Laporta if you can help it. Try to trade him away for pennies, and then keep Tucker Kraft and TJ Hawkinson. Play Tucker until TJ comes back. In fact, play Tucker until TJ comes back and shows that he's 100% and is going to be good in this offense. And then once that happens, you can start playing TJ Hawkinson and maybe also trade Tucker Kraft, maybe for a bigger haul than you're trading Sam Laporta for. And maybe you just had the luckiest tight end season of anybody in the league, and you end up getting a nice haul and having a deep roster down the stretch. To all of you Sam Laporta roster managers, I'm sorry. This is rough. Room 237 says Kyler Williams, number 1 overall. Obviously not a question. Well, I'll make it into a question. Is Kyler Williams number 1 overall? No, I don't think so. I think Derrick Henry is probably a better option there. But he's very much in the conversation. He's scoring touchdowns at an unbelievable pace, as is Derrick Henry, and is the clear number 1 in that offense. All of the Blake Corum hype was misplaced, which if you listened to me this offseason, you didn't have any of, because I did not have any fears about Blake Corum. He's the bell cow and will continue to be so. Jermaine Robinson says Jets or Bears defense rest of season. Well, these are 2 very good defenses, so let's look at the schedule briefly. The New York Jets, upcoming Patriots, Texans, Cardinals, Colts. Not particularly great. Then they have their bye. Fantasy playoffs, you're looking at Jaguars, Rams, Bills. Also not particularly great. There's some decent matchups coming, but mostly not very good. Chicago Bears have the Commanders, Cardinals, Patriots out of their bye. Again, not super great. Some similar teams, actually. Playoff run is 49ers, Vikings, Lions, Seahawks. Also not good. Okay, so this is a lot of bad matchups for both of these teams. I might be looking to stream instead, or to find another good defense that is available and better. I wonder if the Denver Broncos are available for you, because they are equally a strong defense, but have really good matchups down the stretch. Some tough ones coming up. Also, they play the Panthers next week, which is really nice. But week 12, Raiders. Week 13, Browns. Super late bye week. Week 15, Colts. That's playable for the Broncos with Anthony Richardson at quarterback, I believe, which if he is. So that's one I would probably prefer. But with those schedules, I might be looking to stream or go a different route. at the position. Turgay Kagler says, hi, 49ers versus Cowboys, Chiefs versus Raiders, or Lions versus Titans for week 8. Assuming this is also a DST question. It is going to be the Lions versus the Titans there. Chiefs versus Raiders should also be very good. But I will say the divisional matchups often seem to go a little wonky. So I would just probably avoid it purely for that reason. And then the Detroit Lions have been playing great defense. Even without Aiden Hutchinson this past week, they had 4 sacks against the Vikings, who are obviously very good. And the Titans are the number 1 opponent for fantasy defenses. So if I can get a good defense against the Titans in a week, I'm playing them for sure. Mile High Luke says, happy Monday, all. I'm sweating a Kyler blow-up game. It's time. Yes, please, Mile High Luke. I have more Kyler Murray than any other player in fantasy, so I am here with you on this. Sign me up for the Kyler Murray blow-up. IP14 says, I'm up 40 points with Mike Evans left. My opponent has Baker, Zay, Dobbins, and the Bucks kicker. Do I win? It's PPR. Well, this is a 100% here for the chat and being live and not for the podcast. But you know what? That's the bonus you get for being here live, everybody. I am up 40 points with Mike Evans. So I'm going to call that 55 points. My opponent has Baker. We'll call that 18. Zay will call that 15. That's 33. Baker or Dobbins, call that 12. That's 55. And the Bucks kicker, McLaughlin, is very good. I think you do not win. Granted, I gave Zay a pretty good game there, but it's against the Buccaneers. Is it against the Buccaneers? Yes, it's against the Buccaneers. This should be a super fun game, and it should be a lot of points left for you two, but I do not think you win if I had to guess. However, I will be rooting for you. Well, there's a lot of comments for the next several miles. Where's the next question? A lot of Patriots talk here. Here we go. Jermaine Robinson. Thoughts on Ricky Pearsall rest of season with the news on Ayuk? Good question, Jermaine Robinson. I will probably consider over the course of today whether I want to add Ricky Pearsall to the waiver column. Obviously, playing in his first game back this past Sunday with coming off of being shot through the chest in the offseason. Did not do very much. 5 targets, but only caught 3 catches for 21 yards. That being said, he was a first-round pick. He has a lot of talent. Brandon Ayuk had 6 targets that were similarly ineffective in this game and had largely not been very good with his targets over the course of the season, and now is missing the rest of the season, it sounds like. Ricky Pearsall is probably going to be the number 2A in this, or 2B in this offense, with George Kittle and Deebo Samuel rotating in the 1 and 2B, 2A slot alongside Ricky Pearsall. In previous years, that would have been an amazing spot. This particular year, I have not been super excited about the second guy in the Niners offense. It hasn't been as good. They've been running the ball a lot, which fair enough with Jordan Mason. And Brock Purdy has not looked quite as good as he has, in the last couple of years. All that being said, if he's healthy, if I could get a first-round wide receiver who's probably one of the top 2 or 3 targets in what should be a generally good offense for a functionally good quarterback, I probably like to do it. So Ricky Pearsall should probably be added in a lot of spots. I don't think he'll get heavily added this week just because he didn't do anything on Sunday, which means we might have another week to watch and see how things go without Brandon Ayuk. That being said, and I've said this, I said this earlier on in the pod, if we can get these guys in advance before the breakout, it means we get them for much cheaper. So if you have a spot to stash away Ricky Pearsall, I would very much consider doing it this week. Let me look at my wide receiver list. Tyler Lockett, Jalen Tolbert, Demario Douglas, Romeo Doubs, the Saints guys. Okay, so Pearsall is slotting in for me probably above Dobbs, below Demario Douglas, which essentially means like a 3% fab bid to tuck him away if you can, if you have space. Definitely has a lot of upside rest of the season. I will say that, Jermaine. Virginia Man says, I hope Tua comes back. I traded Jordan Love and Devontae Adams for Tyreek Hill. Wow. Hopefully you did that because you had another great starting quarterback. If you did, then this could be super lucrative because Tua should be coming back. Very possibly in week 8 against the Cardinals, I believe. Yes, which would be a super, super sweet matchup for Tua to return to and Tyreek to go off in. Week after that, they get the Bills, which, good defense, but very good chance for a high-scoring game where Tyreek has to do a bunch. Tua is coming back. It should be very soon, and Tyreek Hill should be a stud once again once he is back. So, all things considered, if you have another good quarterback, this could be a great trade for you. Good time to make it as well, right before Tua comes back. Cavo Richards says, lost Ayuk, it seems, for the season. Tolbert, Shakir, Downs, Douglas, or Coleman rest of season PPR. My waiver is very sparse. Thank you. Well, Cavo, I don't even have Khalil Shakir in my waiver column this week because with the arrival of Amari Cooper, I don't really have any remaining excitement about Khalil Shakir. I don't have Josh Downs in the waiver column this week because with the return of Anthony Richardson, Josh Downs is absolute poop. It really, really sucks how good he was with Joe Flacco and how bad he's been with Anthony Richardson. But until we see Richardson do something with Josh Downs, we cannot trust him at all, and I don't see the upside. And then Keon Coleman also didn't make it. He's a fringe consideration for the waiver wire column, I will say. But it's just been so spottily on big plays, usually at the end of games, it feels like. I don't think he's reliable. He kind of feels like Xavier Worthy, big, large-sized, cold weather Xavier Worthy. And I don't really like that very much. So it's between Jalen Tolbert and Demario Douglas for me. And in the column, I have them at number 2 and number 3, with Jalen Tolbert edging Demario Douglas out by like 1% fab bid. So it's Tolbert for me, but Douglas is right there. And if you are looking for someone that you need to start on a weekly basis, I might even prefer Demario Douglas by a hair. Tolbert, I think, has more upside in the right matchups. But yeah, both are great. You could not go wrong adding either, I don't think. Lee Ving says, Hunter Henry rest of season, ? Full point PPR. This comes largely, I would assume, off the back of Hunter Henry's week 7 performance, which was 9 targets, 8 catches, 92 yards. Super exciting, right? Here's the problem, unfortunately. They were playing the Jaguars. The Jaguars are the worst defense, arguably, in the league. Certainly one of the most lucrative for fantasy matchups, and that includes the tight end position. We expected this. Hunter Henry was a sneaky start for John Paulson, and in our Friday podcast, he was going to be good this week. He will go back to being bad most weeks, but he will have some good weeks. So he is a fringe tight end 1. He's the kind of guy that you can play every now and then, and he will have a good week, but you're trying to predict when that will be, and it can be tough unless he's playing a matchup like the Jaguars. I'd rather have many other guys at the tight end position, but if most of them aren't available, which is very possible, Hunter Henry is a good option. Good, not great. Jay Lizard says Luke Musgrave is the biggest bust. Not even close to being true based off where they were drafted, Lizard, but based off, I assume, your hopes for Luke Musgrave, and given the fact that he doesn't exist with Tucker Kraft being the tight end 1. Fair enough. I mean, not fair enough, but I see your point, kind of. Lucius Varanus 44 says, with CMC maybe come back week 10, do you think he's worth trading for? 6-1 currently, but have been using Mason. Yes, if you have Jordan Mason, I would absolutely make a move for CMC, and I would do it as soon as possible so that the news does not come out that he's coming back next week and the price jumps way up. I would absolutely trade, a fringe starting flex option for him if someone's willing to do that. I would trade pretty much anybody that was in the waiver column this week, or the waiver column or the waiver priority list pod this week to get CMC, and a number of names above that as well. Especially when you have Mason, because that means you're riding the Mason RB1 train right up until the time CMC returns, and then hopefully you're switching right over to the CMC RB1 train. A lot of conversation between Mile High Luke and Jay Lizard. I hope you guys are enjoying your conversation. Rob H says, I picked up Hunter Henry for a spot start over injured Dallas Goedert. I want to pick up Douglas over one of them, but I guess I can't do that. You can do that. You can pick him up over Hunter Henry for sure. Let's just double check who they're playing next week before I get too frisky here. They're playing the Jets. The Jets are they are a top 10 matchup in terms of difficulty for tight ends. So I don't think you're going to be excited about playing Hunter Henry next week. You can drop Hunter Henry for Demario Douglas. And if Dallas Goedert does not get healthy by week 8, you can stream somebody else. It might be picking up Hunter Henry again to stream. Hopefully not. But yes, you can do that. Pick up Demario Douglas. Mile High Luke, by the way, says Jacob Cowling got a ton of pub all offseason and has shined a bit. I think he could be the guy. ? This related obviously to the Ricky Pearsall question. I will say it's not impossible that Cowling is decent or involved for the 49ers offense with Brandon Ayuk going out. But it's worth noting he was drafted in the 4th round, 135th overall. Ricky Pearsall, please hold while I attempt to type letters. Ricky Pearsall was drafted 31st overall in the 1st round. Based off that investment alone, I am going to assume that Ricky Pearsall is the better play for the 49ers because that's what they assumed. And he's now back and reportedly healthy. And he got 5 targets in his first game. They just didn't work out very well. Brock Purdy looks very off. So give me Pearsall. Ashley H says, thoughts on Deontay Johnson rest of season? Oh, boy. The number one thing here is that they don't go back to Bryce Young, because if that happens, Deontay is shot. Hopefully they stick with Andy Dalton and just let Bryce Young continue to learn. I don't know why they would make the move away from that, because realistically speaking, I don't think they should be trying to win games here. I think the move was more about protecting Bryce Young and letting him learn rather than getting destroyed on a terrible team with a terrible O-line. So I hope they stick with Andy Dalton. I think they stick with Andy Dalton. If that's the case, I like Deontay Johnson rest of the season. It's worth noting he's been battling an injury these past few weeks. If and when he gets healthy, based off what we saw from when he was healthy, when Andy Dalton first came in, he can be an absolute PPR stud. I think he can be a wide receiver 2 pretty easily if things are going right. So hold on to him. Let him get healthy, hopefully. Let's hope that Andy Dalton stays in a quarterback, and I think he will be good rest of the season. Jay Lizard says, any thoughts on Brock Purdy? Obviously, after the disappointing game against the Chiefs. First of all, the Chiefs are an incredibly good defense. They're very, very good at scheming away guys like Brock Purdy, I think. That being said, he has not been very good. He's had 2 games this year with 3 touchdowns. Every other game, he's had 1 or fewer, and he's been throwing more interceptions of late. He still is throwing for a lot of yards, which is nice. But obviously, you need to get those touchdowns for it to matter. He, to me, is a fringe QB1 rest of the season. He should be good in good matchups. His best games came against the Seahawks and the Rams, both of whom were very beatable defenses. And most of the rest of the defenses he faced has actually been pretty good, except the Cardinals he dudded against. He should have been better against them. So I think he should have plenty of good games. I think he's a streamer type fringe QB1. He's playing the Cowboys defense in week 8, which was scary coming into the year, but isn't scary in my opinion now. I think that that's a great opportunity for him to throw a bunch of yards and a few touchdowns and have a good fantasy day. Then he's on bye, which isn't obviously ideal. Fantasy playoff stretch, he gets the Bears, which sucks, the Rams, which is great, and the Dolphins, which sucks, and then the Lions, which is pretty good. So off and on, he should be okay. Again, fringe QB1 for me. Virginia Man says they have Lamar. He has Lamar as his other quarterback. Let me go back. This is where you traded Jordan Love. Yes, that's perfect. Absolutely beautiful. Speaking of which, that's the kind of situation where if you're holding on to a guy who's good and you can't trade him, which you should be trying to do, those are the kind of guys you can drop for important waiver ads. But obviously, if you can trade Jordan Love, do that. In exactly the kind of move Virginia Man made. Well done there. Rob H says, I'm showing Juwan Jennings is only 30% rostered. How come he's not on your ad list? Shouldn't he deserve huge fab where available? He deserves some fab where available. He'll be good also, probably in situations rest of season. Now that Brandon Ayuk's going to be out. Here's what I'll say. Ricky Pearsall was not around when Juwan Jennings had his blow-up games earlier this year. He also has his blow-up games very spottily, and I don't think it's going to be super reliable. He probably should be rostered, but I'd rather add Ricky Pearsall, to be honest, and I'd rather add Jalen Tolbert or even DeMario Douglas. That being said, if you want to jump down the list a little bit and pick up Juwan Jennings or those other guys are rostered in your leagues, I don't think that's a bad move at all. I think you could have some value. And it's not impossible either that he just is the two or alongside Debo and Kittle, and Pearsall's not. But based off the investments and the moves they've made, I would like Pearsall a little bit more for that role. Jay Lizard says Dalton Kincaid is a big of a bust as Laporta. Close to it, but I think Kincaid has had more decent games than Laporta has, and has certainly been getting more targets and more valuable targets. Mile High Luke asks, looking for upside at tight end late season. Do you think Theo Johnson or Jatavian Sanders tight end premium league? Give me Jatavian Sanders. He had a really good game this past week. I believe 6 catches on 6 targets. He actually made the waiver wire column this week. Last 2 weeks, 13 targets, 11 catches, and 110 yards. So that's pretty good. He'd be my pick there. Yaden22 says, with how good Breece Hall is doing, is Allen really that good of a pickup? Yes, Yaden. And this is the question that apparently everybody is stuck on and refuses to get over, and is why Braylon Allen is still so readily available and is the number one priority. This pickup is not about Breece Hall being good. Early in the season, there was a tiny little glimmer that would be the case, but this is not what this is about anymore. This is about having what is arguably the best handcuff in fantasy. Jordan Mason theoretically would be it when he goes back to being a handcuff, but for now he's a starter. Braylon Allen is a elite RB1 potential upside if Breece Hall gets hurt. So the reason you want him on your roster, if you have a bench spot for him, is not to play him, not because Breece Hall is going to struggle. It's because if something happens to Breece Hall, you have a league winner, literal league winner. That's why you're tucking him away. William E. says, should I drop Bears defense for Ravens? I streamed Bengals this week and plan to drop them for Hawkinson to hopefully keep my Sam Laporta rage down. Let's look at the week 8 schedule real quick. The Bengals get the Eagles, which isn't great. The Bears, who you're talking about dropping, get the Commanders, which is certainly not great, as long as Jaden Daniels plays. Keep in mind, he got banged up. Rib injury, it sounded like. Should be okay, but just keep an eye on that. The Ravens get the Cleveland Browns. Sign me up. I will note, there's a good chance that Jameis Winston is running this offense next week, and I think he's a much better quarterback than what Deshaun Watson has been the past several weeks. But he's also Jameis Winston, who's famous for throwing a lot of interceptions. This offensive line is still very subject to allowing sacks, and they traded away their best offensive player in Amari Cooper before Nick Chubb's return. Now he's their best offensive player, and they will probably try to rely on him in the run game. But the Ravens are going to blow them out, which means they're going to have to throw, which means Jameis Winston's probably going to throw interceptions. And if it's Dorian Thompson-Robinson, by the way, who was technically the number 2 on the depth chart this past week, that I like that even better. So yes, drop the Bears and pick up the Ravens. Jay Lizard asked, does Njoku go into beast mode with Watson out for the season? Well, it's worth noting that David Njoku had 14 targets, 10 catches, 76 yards, and a touchdown this past week with a mix of quarterbacks. I'm not positive how much of his work came with DTR versus Jameis versus Deshaun Watson, though it's worth noting Deshaun Watson actually had the best passer rating of any of those quarterbacks this past week. It is also worth noting that David Njoku caught a touchdown pass at the very end of the game from Jameis Winston. And all of that aside, forget the quarterback changes. I would have said he's going to beast mode rest of the season because Amari Cooper is gone, and he is now has a good chance to be the number one target, which he was this past week. I think David Njoku, if healthy, which he has struggled to be this year so far, could challenge George Kittle and Brock Bowers for the number one tight end rest of season. Legitimately believe that is possible. So yes, beast mode. If he is a trade, if he's his roster manager is willing to trade him, which they're probably not based off what just happened. Go and get David Njoku. Do whatever it takes. I mean, not whatever it takes, but do a lot of stuff to get David Njoku. I think it'll be a very good rest of season. Big Mac Brad says, would you trade Brock Bowers? Probably not. And Chris Olave for Laporta and Cooper Kupp. That would make my wide receivers Amon-Ra, Kupp, DJ Moore, Waddle, and Brian Thomas. No, absolutely not. I would not do this, Big Mac Brad. I believe that Cooper Kupp is going to be a much better wide receiver rest of season than Chris Olave because he might be the number one wide receiver rest of season. He's going to return this Thursday, it sounds like. All signs point to yes. And with Puka Nacua still out, Cooper Kupp might be getting double-digit targets every single game. So he's going to be an absolute stud. I get the intent to trade for him. But Brock Bowers is the number one tight end in fantasy, and Sam Laporta has been absolute garbaggio. You're probably losing 9 fantasy points a week with that drop-off at tight end. Seriously. And from Kupp to Olave, you're maybe losing like 6 or 7. Hopefully. It's not impossible that this is a wash, but I would still rather have the elite tight end and hope that Chris Olave is better once healthy. Keep in mind, Rashid Shaheed out for the season means that once Chris Olave is back from his concussion, he might get a big bump in target share, downfield usage, and therefore fantasy value. That could be big for Chris Olave rest of the season. Also, worth noting, you have Amon-Ra, DJ Moore, Jalen Waddle, who should be better when Tua returns, and Brian Thomas. That's a great wide receiver core. I'm not looking to improve my wide receiver core by tanking my tight end position. So I wouldn't make that move. Reynaldo Rincon says, Drake May or Russell Wilson, I assume this means the rest of season. This is a tough one. I have both in the waiver column, and I have Drake May a tiny hair ahead of Russell Wilson. One of the main reasons is that if the Steelers lose a game or two in a row and Russell Wilson plays bad a game or two in a row, it's still not impossible that they go back to Justin Fields in Pittsburgh. All that being said, I think that Drake May and Russell Wilson will be pretty similar fantasy options rest of season, which is quite good in good matchups. QB1s in many weeks. Well, briefly, let's check on Russell Wilson's schedule because I know Drake Mays is bad. Wilson gets the Giants, then a bye, then the Commanders, Ravens, Browns, Bengals, Browns again, Eagles, and Ravens. His matchups are honestly a little better, especially in the playoffs. Eagles and Ravens is really nice. Chiefs in Week 17 is terrible. So that's not great for your championship game. It's pretty much a coin flip here, I'd say. I would lean Drake May, but both are good ads. Ronaldo also asks Hunter Henry or Dalton Kincaid rest of season. Wow. I'm going Dalton Kincaid. I'm sticking with Dalton Kincaid. I understand that the frustration versus draft capital is intense, but Dalton Kincaid's targets these past since week 3. These are his targets. 5, 7, 6, 7, 6. the catches, yards, and touchdowns have not been great. I get that, but I'm more willing to trust those targets versus Hunter Henry 3, 3, 4, 5, and then 9 against the Jaguars, and he had 12 against the Seahawks in an overtime game. Seahawks also really, really good defensive target. Hunter Henry will have some blow up games every now and then, but it's just so hard to know when they're coming. And on a weekly basis, I'm getting 6 targets from Dalton Kincaid and 3 from Hunter Henry. I'd rather have Dalton Kincaid. Pion asks, would you trade in half PPR Breece Hall and the rest of the question's not there, but it looks like they fixed the question down below. Amon-Ra, Jaden Reed, and Tyrone Tracy for Breece Hall and Amari Cooper. Okay, there it is. So I'm not sure. I'm confused a little bit now which side you're on, but would I rather have Breece Hall and Amari Cooper or Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jaden Reed, and Tyrone Tracy? Ooh, wee. So this is going to be very roster dependent, or it's going to be somewhat roster dependent. If you are super set at running back, then I maybe prefer the Amon-Ra Jaden Reed side. If you need running back, I'd probably prefer the Breece Hall side. I don't really care about Tyrone Tracy very much, so this is really more about Amon-Ra and Jaden Reed versus Breece Hall and Amari Cooper, which in other words means it's basically 2 wide receiver 1s for an RB1 and a wide receiver 2 with upside. So in a pure vacuum, I'm probably taking the ARSB Reed Tyrone Tracy side by a hair. But again, that's only if, Tracy, if you have a deep bench that Tracy is hanging out on happily, even when Singletary is the number 1 back again. And if you're in need at running back, I would prefer probably having the Breece Hall side. Tough one. Complicated one. Pinoy Pens says, thoughts on Dobbs and Wicks rest of season. Both are available in my PPR league. I'd rather have Romeo Dobbs right now, but that's subject to change on a weekly basis, and neither is going to be reliable, in my opinion. So take that for what it's worth. Robert Mitchell says, Jalen has not been good for fantasy. I assume that means Jalen Hurts, which I don't think that's true. Give me a second. If you mean Jalen Hurts, please clarify below, Robert Mitchell, if you don't mean Jalen Hurts. Oh, I see your clarified question down below. Jalen Hurts has had 22.76 fantasy points last week and 21.86 fantasy points the week before that. He had his bye his week before that, and he had 16 fantasy points the week before that. He's had 1 game below 16 fantasy points, 3 above 20. He has been good for fantasy, and he will continue to be good for fantasy because he scores rushing touchdowns willy-nilly. The question that you ask after that statement that I disagree with is, would you sit in for Drake May this coming week? Your thoughts on stashing Waddle? Oh, okay. So Jalen Hurts gets the Bengals this next week. I'm starting him over Drake May. I don't even need to look at Drake May's matchup to tell you that is the case, but I am starting Jalen Hurts against the Bengals over Drake May. I'm starting Jalen Hurts against most teams over Drake May against most teams. The only time I'd maybe consider a swap there is if May has a great matchup in a week that Hurts does not. And even then, it's worth remembering Jalen Hurts is going to score rushing fantasy points against good passing defenses. Rob H., speaking of the best RB handcuffs, you don't think Algier is in the conversation with Braylon? Algier is in the conversation with Braylon. Absolutely. He would be up there if Bijan got hurt. I don't think... Let me check Tyler Algier's rostership, and I will tell you if he's valid for this question. 39% rostered, so a little less than Braylon Allen. So yeah, you can tuck him away too if you want. I think he would be less good than Braylon Allen, and I think there would be more chance that there would be other running backs involved outside of Braylon Allen versus outside of Algier. So I prefer Braylon Allen, but he's in the conversation as well. Michael Allison says, my RBs are Cook, Chase Brown, Tyrone Tracy, and Bucky Irving. Should I trade one of my QBs, Allen or Love, for a top-tier RB1 guy? Yes, 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 absolutely. This is exactly the kind of thing we talked about earlier with I forget who it was who traded who has Lamar Jackson. Virginia man traded, let's go look. I can find it. Hold. Aha. Traded Jordan Love and Devontae Adams for Tyreek Hill. So you can trade Jordan Love and Chase Brown for a very high-end running back on a team that doesn't have a quarterback potentially. So go find the team that has the worst quarterback with the best running back and try to trade Jordan Love for that player. Trade Jordan Love and Chase Brown for that player if that's what it takes. Maybe find Devin Singletary manager and trade Jordan Love and Tyrone Tracy for another one of their very good running backs. Jermaine Robinson says Tyler Goodson or Trey Sermon or just stay away. I'm a Taylor owner. Tyler Goodson, I definitely prefer. I'm hoping Jonathan Taylor is going to be back, but I would prefer Tyler Goodson. That being said, let me look at my waiver priorities. Tyler Goodson is number 5 for me. I have Ray Davis, Tyrone Tracy, Alexander Madison, and Braylon Allen all ahead of him. So if any of those guys are on the waiver wire, it would be a stay away from Goodson to add one of those guys instead. Iggy says, would you drop Tucker Kraft for David Njoku? I would try not to drop Tucker Kraft. I would try to trade Tucker Kraft because he's a clear-cut tight end 1 right now, and you don't want to drop those. You want to trade them if you can. So see if you can find a trade suitor. Having said that, I kind of think I would like David Njoku more than Tucker Kraft rest of season, though it's very close and Tucker Kraft's very good. I just think David Njoku has more of a chance to be like an elite tight end 1 and a similar chance to be a decent tight end 1. And last question, Iggy says, one more, would you trade Stephon Diggs for James Cook? Yes, I'd probably do that. It's a little bit roster dependent, but assuming you're asking this, it means you would rather have a running back than a wide receiver. From a value standpoint, I would absolutely do that. Okay, that was a big one. Big pod, lots of questions. Thank you, everybody, for all the questions. A lot of good ones, a lot of deep ones, a lot of tough ones. And a lot of names that should be considered that aren't in the column who I may have to consider adding. It is a very late night, end of day job to write this column. So I always like to take a look on Monday morning and see who else should sneak in there. And we have some good names here. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for your questions. Really good stuff. I will see you if you are in the Discord, the 444 Discord. It's a great place to hang out. I will see you there for an AMA tomorrow evening, right before waivers run. If you have not read the waiver column, you absolutely should have a 444 premium subscription, so you can do that. Go for 444.com/plans and use promo code YouTube for 25% off. And then I will see you with John Paulson for the Friday pod, which has been smoking it on value. The sneaky starts from John, the matchups that are worth targeting. The news has been very helpful. So make sure you listen to that pod as well. I will sign off here. Adios, everybody. Have a good one.